Wolverine turns 50 years old this year, so in honor of one of the greatest comic book characters of all time, I want to go over 3 of my favorite Wolverine stories. First, I want to start with what is maybe my favorite Marvel comic of all time, Old Man Logan. Now you might not expect this, but this is actually a great comic for fans of the MCU. Despite it not being part of the main 616 timeline, this was the biggest inspiration for the Logan movie, besides The Last of Us, as well as Logan's origin in Deadpool and Wolverine. Old Man Logan is an alternate history, western cowboy take on Wolverine, where America is a wasteland and Logan is trying to find some sense of normalcy from before the world fell apart. It's created by the same duo who penned the original Civil War comics, Mark Millar and Steve McNiven. McNiven, who we'll hear from again in this video, has this really accessible style where you feel like you're reading a big budget comic book movie on the page. He has a great sense of action, and it's no wonder his work inspired multiple directors. Millar is a prolific writer who I think is best at creating alternate history takes. He was a huge part of the Ultimate Universe comics and writer of Superman Red Son, another great alt history comic. There's all these really fun twists on characters like this Hulk gang, who we don't quite know the origins of at the beginning, but finding out all the ways the original continuity is played with is a big part of the fun. Logan eventually teams up with Hawkeye, who is now blind but just as deadly. And to reveal the rest of the plot would be spoiling it, so if you have not read this, you need to read it on the Marvel app or purchase a paperback. The story of this series is very simple. It's just the origin story of Wolverine being experimented on in Weapon X and how he escapes. But how the story is told is what makes it so special. The art by Barry Windsor Smith, who also wrote this story, is something that has always stuck with me. The colors in the story are just unbelievably striking and add to the series' nightmare quality. The first thing that comes to mind when I think of this story is the color blue. Everything from the shading throughout the cold metallic lab to Wolverine's hair is covered in blue. The story actually has a really beautiful color palette despite being so dark. And even with all of Wolverine's iconic costumes, there's just something about his Weapon X look, which I was first exposed to in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, that was so good at communicating Logan's pain. As for the script, how the dialogue is presented is just as important as the art in creating the story's chaotic atmosphere. There's this unrelenting barrage of patchy, sparse conversation where we're put in Logan's head trying to decipher what's happening to him. When I was younger and first read this, I remember being off-put that there wasn't a strong, clear narrative in the story. But as an adult, I can appreciate the disorienting effect it has, something that I'm sure was deliberate. While most of it is just scientific technobabble, that just leaves more room for Wolverine's suffering to be told visually. It's hard to believe this is the same Wolverine we know and love when he's turned into this mindless animal killing machine. I mean, you could even argue this series is borderline horror, with Wolverine serving as the slasher villain, and the ending is more haunting than you might expect. The final panel is a gut punch and leaves you contemplating what you just witnessed. Not only is this a great Wolverine story, but if you ever wanted to read a Marvel comic that tells most of its story through its visuals, this is it. Last, we're going to be talking about Death of Wolverine. Now, this limited series came out 10 years ago in honor of the 40th anniversary of Wolverine. This was back when I was pretty heavy into comic books, and the hype for this series was insane, at least it was to me. And this is a cover that I don't think gets enough credit for being as iconic as it is. It has this really sick, holographic effect that as soon as I saw it, I knew I had to buy it. Death of Wolverine has this great opening where we find that Logan has lost his healing factor and someone wants him dead. Logan basically just tells them to come find him if they want to kill him. Naturally, the bad guys oblige, and it does not go well for them. One negative I have to say about the series is that when I first read it, I had assumed that this entire series would just be Wolverine taking this John Marston-esque last stand on this island for the entire 4 issues, and that does not happen. The subsequent issues have him traveling all over and meeting with important people from his past. It makes sense, and I suppose this is a more appropriate send-off for the character, but I think having a super violent last stand would have been way more sick. Logan follows the trail and finds that the mastermind behind his pursuers is none other than Cornelius, one of the villains from the Weapon X comic series. I thought that wrapping up Logan's story with the man largely responsible for his pain and suffering was a nice twist. Now, I made a video a while ago just commenting on how comic book stories don't really have a lot of finality to them because they're stories that always have to continue. There's actually an interview with Wolverine's co-creator Len Wein in the first issue where he fully acknowledges that Marvel's just going to bring him back eventually anyway for the cash. But there was still a gravity to this event that was captured really well here and will still have you feeling sentimental for the character even though he's been revived for years. Even reading this story without the hype of when it released, you can't help but feel the emotion in the final pages. The story was written by Charles Soule and drawn by Steve McNiven, the same artist as Old Man Logan. It's definitely not as action-packed as Old Man Logan, but it still maintains that cinematic feel and emotion. I also found the tie-ins to this event to be really moving. I particularly love this page where Cyclops says that despite his absentee space pirate father and meeting his younger self who hates everything that he's become, Logan is still the most complicated relationship that he's ever had. The two of them have such a rich history, and their dichotomy is one of the starkest in Western comics. It speaks to all the history Wolverine's had as Marvel's number 2, only behind Spider-Man. Wolverine is just such a fun character, and I can go on about my favorite stories, but if you have a favorite Wolverine story that I didn't mention, leave it in the comments.